Well, hello again, everybody. It's Mike, and we are now moving on to one of my favorite tests. It's known as a TDS, and this is the TDS meter. TDS stands for Total Dissolved Solids. And because I haven't checked mine recently, I just wanted to show you quickly what I'm about to do. One of the things that you can do is it comes out of the manufacturer with 300 parts per million TDS, but you may live in an area of the country that exceeds that and actually gets into 1,000 parts per million TDS, and that's a boil advisory at that point. So you don't want to calibrate with something that's lower. You want to get something that's a little higher up. Just for your benefit, I just wanted to show that they actually make 1,000 parts per million calibration solution. So 1,000 ppms. I think this cost a few bucks to get. And what I'm going to do is I want to show you on these meters. It's very important that you don't go above too far up from the bulb. So you'll see that there's a bulb inside of this cutout, and then you start getting into this area where the sheath actually gets to it. If you dip this meter above that area that the sheath cover attaches to, you are now getting into the electronics and the solder points, and you might as well just throw this away. Now, this is one that I like because it's backlit and it has some other functions with it as well, such as automatic corrective, temperature correction, I should say. So ATC, just like the pH tester had. So you can get things for cheaper, but I find if you just go for the middle of the road, you're actually going to get a better quality product that's going to last longer and it's going to be more reliable. Okay, so let me show you how this is going to work using this other camera. First things first, I'm going to take the TDS and put it in this 50 milliliter beaker, but I'm only going to go up to just before that line. And when I measure that, it looks like between 20 and 30 is where I need to be. So I'm going to fill that beaker up about halfway. You can see they don't give you a lot of solution, but I'm not going to put anything in that beaker. I'm not going to pre-rinse it. It's already dry. And there's the seal. So I am pouring into the 25, between 20 and 30 figure. Okay, so that's about right. And I'm going to throw away this protective seal. And then what we're going to do is follow the directions that came with this system. It's all folded up to fit in this leather see-through pouch, so that you can see that it says TDS. So pretty cool what they give you here. And I'm just following along what it said to do for calibration. And it says that, you know, if you are getting up to 1,000 parts per million TDS, then you should calibrate to that so that you know that your TDS meter is properly calibrated. So I'm going to take off this sheath protector. I'm going to press and release the on-off button. I'm going to put it in the solution, and you can see it does not get up into the electronics here. And then I'm going to hit mode. It says press and hold mode until the reading on the screen flashes. This indicates that the meter has entered calibration mode. So I need to press and hold the mode. Okay. And it says adjust the result by pressing the on-off button to increase the result value. Okay, so it's at 856, 857. We're going to keep pressing that until we get up to like 999 or 1,000. This meter says it'll read up to 10,000 parts per million. I don't know what that is. Molten lava? Getting very close now. Okay. It's 998. There we go. So it sets to press and hold the mode button until it stops flashing. Okay. And so it's pretty doggone close. It's settling in around 1,007 parts per million, 1,006, something like that. So we're going to get out of that and we're going to rinse it in the solution. And again, not dropping this. I just want to get it so it doesn't get in the electronics. And then I'm going to rinse it off with my RO water and just kind of shake it off and dab it a little bit because we don't want to damage the probe. Okay, so now I can turn it off by pressing and holding, and it turns off the unit. Okay, and then you would normally push that back on and store it. Make sure everything's dry so that your instruction manual for future reference does not get damaged by the water. Okay, so I have a couple different samples here. As you recall, we have been marking the notes on just to log our readings for pH and our millivolts. I should mention was actually negative 145. So that's still pretty good. Anything north of 100 is an intentional number that I'm looking for to make sure that it's healthy. Okay, so I'm going to put this away. This will measure in microns. It's not something that I recommend. We do want it to have the Fahrenheit, so it has the F for the temperature, and that's what we're going to do here, and also get our parts per million. So I'm going to start with tap water. Oh, actually, you know what I want to do is recover the calibration solution because there's nothing wrong with it. I pour it back in the bottle and get my 10 bucks worth out of this bottle. And I'm also going to run the distilled water to rinse out this beaker twice, and the cover, and I'm going to just run my RO because it's even better for it, so it doesn't collect any salt residue forming crystals later. Shake it out really good, holding it tight so I don't drop it and shatter it. And then I'm just going to set it off to the side. You don't want to run a paper towel through this because there could be acids. Remember, we talked about pH being in paper products, and that could skew the next reading for that beaker. And I'm sure you can actually hear this little aspiration noise, and that is my reverse osmosis working, making sure that I don't have I have an anti-siphon break in the line so that it doesn't suck the wastewater back into the drinking water supply. So you're actually hearing it function the way it's supposed to function. Some people have that, some people don't. I highly endorse and recommend that for safety's sake, You do that, otherwise you could create a vacuum and a siphonage like I was talking about before about water mains breaking, and it's a similar effect. If you have a sprinkler system, you already have something similar to that vacuum break installed on the outside of your home or wherever your sprinkler system plumbing is that does the same thing. Otherwise, you could potentially have rainwater overtaking your sprinkler system because there's so much saturation in a low point, and you've been pouring pesticides or fertilizers or whatever into that, and it could be sucked back into your own home's water supply. That's crazy. So you always want to have an anti-siphon vacuum breaker, and that's basically what you're hearing in that air gap. So don't let it freak you out. It's doing what it's supposed to do. I really live and breathe this stuff. Okay, have been since my first system in 1995 when I had a 3-stage system. Kept me healthy all these years, cancer-free. I'm pushing 60 next March, and I'm going to defy the odds. Remember, it's not what the body looks like, it's the miles on the odometer that counts. Okay, so we're now going to do the tests, and I just wanted to let you know what some of this looks like. So I have the distilled water over there. We just rinsed out the beaker. I think what I want to do is I still have some tap water left over, and it's got little tiny bubbles in the bottom of it. I don't know if you can make that out or not, but I'm going to try to agitate those bubbles to surface. Oopsie. Okay, it's a party if somebody spills something. Okay, which is why you always want to have a paper towel handy for a quick spill. Okay, so this is tap water, and what I'm going to do is just get the TDS reading off of the tap water. And so I press my button, you can see it's all lit up, and I put just enough in to reach the probe, but not necessarily up in the electronics range. And I'm just going to let it settle there for a moment, and you can see it's actually doing its thing there. And I just want to give you a little education while we let it set there. Now, usually it's just a few seconds, but I'm going to let it do its thing for a minute. According to watertestingkits.com, they say that the amount of total dissolved solids is a measurement, and these are notes that are in the book where I did my research in phase 1 for water testing for the Trident Defense water treatment system that I teach my students. So the amount of total dissolved solids, which is what TDS stands for, is a measurement of the weight of all solids that are dissolved in water. So what dissolves in water? Salts, just plain and simple. When in the absence of water as it evaporates, what you usually have is the salts. These salts can include minerals, salts, minerals, salts, metals, cations, and anions. And just so that you understand what a cation is, it's spelled like nation with a C, or nations. So some people mispronounce it as cations. That is not how you pronounce that. It is cations because it can be cationic or positively charged ions. Anionic is negatively charged ions, and non-ionics are both positive and negative ions that come in contact and actually are neutralized. Okay, now typically what you'll have is kind of like the majority rules. So if you had a resin bead mix of, say, deionized water resin beads, it would have some of them one color, kind of a beige color, little beads, and then it would have another set that looks like caviar. You could see through it. It's like this clear color, and then the other one would be the exact opposite. It would either be white or it would be black, and it's a harder version And it may even be similar, like they're both cations, but one is harder than the other in terms of charge, kind of like a magnet's strength. And what's really cool is, I wish I had a sample of it for you, but if you can imagine seeing this and you shook it all up, you would see the black and the white, we'll just use white as a color, where it's all mixed, kind of like the stars in darkness in the atmosphere at night, right? And then after a minute or two, and maybe about 5 minutes, what you would see is one color would dominate the other and rise to the surface, and the other would fall. It is so cool. You would just see all black and all white, or all white and all black, depending on how it's color-coded based on the manufacturer of that particular cation or anion, right? So, for example, you use, if you're trying to soften water, you're using an ion exchange system called a water softener, because all that stuff is attracted like a magnet is attracting anything, fines and staples and paper clips. You know, it just, and it grabs it, but then it gets to a point of saturation where it has to be flushed out with salts. And that's where the regeneration process of a water softener is flushing out those resin beads and basically recharging them for the next 2 or 3 days worth of service, and unless you have some people, out-of-towners, coming to visit you, and then you may want to recharge it sooner just because of that one-off situation. That's just a real-life example of using ions. Okay? Since dissolved ionized solids can increase the conductivity of a solution, the TDS meter works by measuring the conductivity of the solution. It bears repeating the way they wrote it. The conductivity reading is converted into an estimate of the TDS, which is an indication of water quality. Okay. A high TDS reading does not necessarily mean that the water quality is poor, as it also reflects the amount of minerals and salts that are present in the water. And these are found naturally in some waters. And we've talked about what I like to call, for slang, liquid rock. If you have water that is sourced through the mountains and rivers and reservoirs, there's going to be a propensity to have a higher TDS reading in that water. Just so that you're aware, the EPA says that as long as it is under 1,000 parts per million TDS, the water sample, per milliliter, right? So just 1 milliliter, you can have up to 1,000, but if you hit 1,000, you're now in a boil advisory. You need to slow your roll on using that. And when you boil for 20 minutes. You don't just, oh, it just turned to a boil, now I can, like, it's safe to consume. No, it is not. You need the 20 minutes to actually kill off the bugs and anything else that's in that water. But for the Safe Drinking Water Act from the EPA, the maximum that you want to hit, no more than 500 parts per million TDS per milliliter, okay? And on the biological standpoint, you don't want to have any colony-forming units of bacteria, or CFUs, as we say for short, to be above 500. So it needs to be at 500 or below on both TDS and colony-forming units, or CFUs of bacteria. So 2 different readings, but 2 call-outs that determine if your water is acceptable by the EPA standards. Now, I come from an economy where I was working for a manufacturer of medical-grade water treatment systems. So these weren't the Rain Softs or the Culligans. It wasn't Zero Water. It wasn't Brita or Pure. It wasn't any business-to-consumer solution. This was business-to-business. We're talking hospitals, universities, colleges, Department of Defense, Indian Health Services, national medical and dental organizations, networks. So we were dealing with reducing TDS all the way down to 10 parts per million or less. And in some cases, you could hit 0. It just depended on where you live and how the water's processed and how it's prepped before it got to our treatment system, and what's going on post-treatment for finished water that is both pure and has the efficacy that they're looking for, which is the magic of, quality treatment so people don't get sick. All right, so I rambled on a little bit here, so we're just going to turn it back on because it auto shut it off. And it looks like, I don't know if you can see that, but it looks like 57 parts per million. Okay? Let's see if you can see that without me spilling. So you got to read it this way. So there you go. And it's hovering. And that's because as I tilt this, I'm taking the probe out of the water, so I don't want to do that too much. But it looks like you can stir it around a little bit just to make sure. And I'm sitting in the high 50s here. It's fluxing between 60, 59, 58, 57, and that's where we're going to go. So I will even press hold, and now it's going to hold it at 60 parts per million. You can see the ppm flashing because I pressed the hold button. So I'm going to write down that my TDS was at 60 parts per million. Okay? And then I'm going to clear that. And actually, I'm just going to take it with a clear, goes back, and let's see if I can get the mode to show temperature. I can. And so if you toggle through the mode button, eventually you'll get to Fahrenheit, and it says it's at 74.8 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm just going to put in my notes at 74.8 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is the reading of my tap water. Now, I'm going to take this reading, and I'm going to flush it with my distilled water. So if you want to see me do that here, there you go. Just rinsing it. And now I'm going to go with my RO water, which is here in the smaller, and I'm going to swirl it around to get rid of any bubbles, and then set it off to the side. And I am getting a 74.8 as well. Now this TDS was the tap, so I need to write that down. And then TDS for this is also at 74.8 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is going to be my RO, and that's the finished water after it's gone through the entire reverse osmosis system, including my alkaline finishing stage 6 treatment. And so now I'm going to press the mode button again, and we can see that I'm sitting right about 21 parts per million or 22 parts per million. I'll go with the upper, 22 ppm. So what I'm looking at is water that is better than my tap, and my tap is still pretty good. That's considered anywhere from 0 up to 100 is considered pretty quality water. So to be right above the midway point at 60 parts per million, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, if you have 250 parts per million, you should be happy with that too. Here's what you need to know about TDS. TDS is also, if you were to equate it to gas mileage on your car, that would be determining the miles per gallon. You know, how far can you get on 1 gallon of gas? And so the higher the parts per million are, the worse your gas mileage is going to be in terms of the water treatment system's filters. They won't last as long. So it's like driving in a rural countryside area, dusty roads all the time. That air filter and the oil filter is going to get all nasty, and you should be doing frequent changes of those filters and the oil change as well, because you're putting it under what's considered heavy duty service. So if you start heading north of 250 parts per million and you're up at the 500 parts per million, you're probably going to see that you're going to have to more frequently change out your filters at whatever stage, because of these salts and minerals that are in the water that you can't see until the water has evaporated, and then you see the residue and the residual effects of crystallized salts and scale, like we were talking about, the calcium and magnesium. Now, you don't use this TDS for measuring hardness. That is a completely different metric. But this gives you an idea of, for example, chlorine or even chloramine, which are, it's a halio type of, it's a solvent that is insoluble. So they're a different type of salt, and you've seen this before. If you use like bleach, sodium hypochlorite, and you get the 6% solution or whatever from the store, you'll notice if you open and close and pour out that it's going to have that crusty effect when you take off the cap, like it's like a margarita with salt all around the drink. You know, you're going to have some of that salt crystallized that dried in between the threads when you poured the chlorine into a toilet or wherever you were using it, or in the laundry. So just know that TDS gets tricky, and I teach my students about the balance that I've been talking about knowing where those margins are for TDS. Can it be too high? Yes. Can it be too low? Absolutely. There's some safe ranges, and there's also treatment systems that only will perform their best up to, say, 150 parts per million. So if you're in a market where your water is at 250 or north of 250, getting up into the 500s or even higher than that at different times of the year, that's going to be a logical thing for you to say, yeah, that's not going to work for me. That's not the kind of water that I'm working with. And you would have to really rethink your game plan as far as your treatment plan and coming up with a viable solution. So I hope this helps you with the TDS. Take care.